You're listening to the Valley Current.
Yeah, they're saying 350 to 400,000 people are born daily on average, and that we've gone from
worldwide.
Worldwide, and that we've gone from about 100 years ago, there were 2 billion people on the planet, to now there's closer to 8 billion, maybe even 9 billion on the planet. So the planet is carrying a larger load, which of course gets us to this topic of the state of affairs with both coronavirus, Omicron, and now monkeypox. And I'm sure you've been watching this news, and you must be thinking about what's next. At least that's where my head goes. You tell me what you think is going on.
Well, the monkeypox is trivial.
Yeah.
In this country, I don't think there are any more than 8 or 10 deaths. But it's trivial, and it's, first of all, it's misnamed. It has nothing to do with monkeys. It is spread, as far as is known, by 3 or 4 different kinds of rats or mice.
So it should be called mousepox or rat pox, right?
Yes, and it is usually non-fatal. It creates blisters on the skin. Usually people survive. It's not pleasant, but people usually survive. The attention paid to it is way out of proportion to the numbers of victims, even though the WHO just called it a epidemic, or I don't think they called it an emergency, I think they called it.
Yeah, they moved the needle up from where they were. They were watching it. They declared it a global emergency today, either today or yesterday. And there's an expanding outbreak in more than 70 countries, is what the reports are. And of course, we might be a lot more sensitive, right, to watching this sort of data and trying to figure out what's going on to the planet. And maybe it's the carrying capacity of the planet. Is that some sort of limit that we're hitting now with a fourfold increase?
What is not ever stated in the public media is that there are dozens of new viruses or microorganisms, and also small vertebrates, that cause diseases newly discovered every month in the world. There is a journal that I subscribe to that has pages and pages of new discoveries of diseases caused mostly by viruses, but also by single-cell microorganisms. Most of them are not in the United States. They're in Asian and African countries. But the arising of new virus diseases is a constant thing going on all the time. Dozens are reported every couple of months. So why one is singled out and another not is very, very strange. I'm trying to think of the name of the journal that I subscribed to. It recently moved from paper to online. And I'll send a copy to you.
Okay.
You can read the table of contents. That's all you need to do to realize what I've just described. It's called the Journal of, not the Journal of Infectious Diseases, that's a separate journal. I've been subscribed to it for years and years. But I will send you a copy when I next receive one.
I mean, your point is the cumulative cases are not that large. It's under 1,000 cases. But I guess they're saying that it's across 30 different countries. And when you look at the graph data, it looks like it's starting to accelerate. But then again, towards the end, it looks like it's flattening out. So somewhere in this, you might say, the data is not as severe.
I don't know. There are international and WHO policies that are difficult to explain and difficult to understand. I was a WHO consultant for many years.
Right.
And worked at their headquarters in Geneva several weeks a year for a couple of years. So it's a very political organization. The head of the WHO and the heads of the various departments are all traditionally given to a person in a certain country.
Right.
For example, the English always headed the virus section, and you cannot change that. That kind of nonsense that goes on there, and the waste of money is enormous. They flew me to Geneva first class way back in the four-engine prop plane era. I remember them handing me and my colleague who had traveled with me a 2-pound box of caviar. Everybody took a cupful of caviar in the first class. This is on Swiss Air. And they paid, and I don't remember the exact numbers. So you see, it's trivial. It's not worth talking about.
But people have become so sensitive to trying to run this stuff. Right?
Again, a kind of cultural thing, because everybody is on top of viruses now.
Right.
And virus causation of disease, but there are dozens and dozens of virus diseases that exceed monkeypox. And it's a very different virus. It's a double-stranded DNA virus, which is light years different from COVID. Why so much attention is being paid to it, I have no idea.
Well, it must be a credibility issue, right? They want to be credible.
It has a track that seems to follow the COVID. That is, it's a virus disease. It's spreading, although a trivial spread. And everybody's conscious now of that phenomenon. And so you get scared, they get scared to death when they see the track of this monkey virus seeming to follow COVID. And because it's misnamed as a monkey virus, people probably think that it's like COVID, which emerged from an animal source, probably. And so they think this is another animal source virus like COVID. Far and away different from COVID.
Well, plus it gets in the news because people seem to be anticipating another wave of badness. Like there's almost like, what's next? We know something else is next. Like there's a...
there have been dozens, maybe hundreds of nexts.
Right. Mm-hmm. Reported every month in this journal that I described and cannot remember the title of. Right. You're saying it's just a fact of life.
It seems to be a fad that follows what people think they know about COVID.
Right.
It's not an epidemic. It hasn't reached, technically, it has not reached endemic or epidemic numbers. There are technical numbers that qualify a disease for being an epidemic or a pandemic, and it's light years away from those numbers.
But do you think it represents, like effectively, it's a way to get federal money into the hands of big pharma or into the hands of grants or into the hands of someone?
It wouldn't surprise me to learn that that's happening.
because it does open up once there's this sort of announcement, it does open up funding. And the funding presumably will be accepted by whoever seeks it, whether it's for a vaccine or further study or whatever. And it almost becomes like people want to get ahead of whatever next thing is out there. And you might say there's so many other more distinct and dangerous things out there to worry about than monkeypox.
Absolutely. That's not realized by the media or by governments. They don't have people who know the literature.
Or even polio has come back into the news, right?
Yeah, well, that was one case in New York from somebody who arrived from some foreign country. I mean, that's not important. Definitely not important.
But we've sensitized the world to an expectation of biological danger.
Yes, that happened in 1918.
Still 20 years later, at least when my parents were growing up, they didn't seem very worried about viruses. Like, they didn't remember 1918. Of course, my dad was born in 1925, but he never talked about.
I'll bet they remember polio.
Yeah, they remember polio because I remember we did get some vaccination for polio in a sugar cube. I remember that was like the delivery system was an oral sugar cube kind of vaccination, at least in the back of my mind.
Yeah,
I remember.
That was the Sabin type polio vaccine, but that is no longer used in this country. For years it was used, and now this country has reverted to the Salk vaccine for several reasons. One of the reasons is that the Sabin vaccine is a live attenuated vaccine, and it has one huge advantage. It spreads throughout the population from families where a condition known as the fecal oral route exists in every family with a newborn child. And the virus is eliminated in the feces of the families who are infected, including the babies, because the Sabin vaccine is not dangerous, with one serious exception. That is that the Sabin vaccine, I used to know the data, I vaguely recall 1 in 3 million vaccinees come down with one of the 3 types of polio virus in the Sabin vaccine. It's apparently the result of perhaps the failure of all of the viruses in the vaccine to be attenuated, or it's due to the fact that there are some peculiarly susceptible people who get the disease from the vaccine when others don't. That's the reason the Sabin vaccine is not used in this country anymore, because lawsuits developed by the 1 in 3 million parents of children who got polio from the Sabin vaccine. And Big Pharma lobbied to establish an organization that is still in existence to this day. That is a unit within the FDA that ensures all of the vaccine manufacturers against being sued by people who acquire a disease from the vaccine. And the government will pay for the costs of those rare circumstances. Otherwise, the companies would go out, would not produce vaccines anymore.
So the Salk vaccine took over because of these rare events.
That's right. The Salk vaccine, with one enormous exception that occurred 50 years ago or 40 years ago, the Salk vaccine consists of dead viruses. So therefore, the dead virus cannot produce the disease. The learning curve that resulted in evidence that the Salk vaccine has no live viruses in it was at a costly price. I think I told you this story. It was called the, I'm blocking on the name of the company. It was in that small town near Oakland. Anyhow, it's not important. But did I tell you about that event?
No, I don't remember if you did.
Well, it was a small company that made one of the first Salk polio vaccines. They were one of the first manufacturers. And Salk vaccine is made by growing the hot virus and then killing it with, what is the compound that's used to preserve tissue or something? Anyhow, I'll remember it. But what was observed was called an inactivation curve. In other words, you start out with hot polio and you dilute it in a series of test tubes by, let's say, 10%. So the first tube contains 1 million particles, the next tube contains 100,000, the next tube contains 10,000, next tube contains 1,000, the final tube contains nothing. This compound, so liquid,
Right.
to each of the tubes, and you discover how many virions are destroyed by this compound, and then you exceed it by a couple more dilutions or a couple more increases in potency until you find the virus is completely inactivated, dead by whatever dilution of this chemical you discovered, which is a very easy test. Well, that was published, and the inactivation curves are usually a straight line. If you envision an XY coordinates, then there is a straight line from the upper left down to the lower right, indicating that as the increase in the chemical occurs, more and more viruses are killed. The problem that existed at that time is that the end of the straight line that approached the coordinate didn't hit the line, so they assumed that the line would just carry on to the coordinate, and that was the final dilution that would kill every virus. And then, for safety's sake, they even increased the amount of the chemical by a couple more fold and used that as the amount of chemical necessary to kill all of the viruses, and therefore the Salk vaccine was made. But it was discovered when the government laid out rules for who gets vaccines first and second and third and fourth at that time in the early or middle 50s. And it was discovered that some people in the Oakland area were coming down with polio. And I won't go into all the details, so I'll just summarize it by saying that it was discovered that that straight line did not continue straight to the ordinate. What happened was that the line became asymptotic to the line, which means that there were live polio particles present in the Salk vaccine made by this company, because the line should not be extrapolated, it should be made asymptotic. And then the real tragedy became revealed. The first people to get the vaccine, not from this company, fortunately, from other companies, I believe pregnant women, and then children from a certain age group, and then it went down from there. what happened in this town in Oakland was that the physicians who received the vaccine that was to be delivered in accordance with the priority list gave it to their own children.
Wow.
For reasons that you can decide for yourself, but it's not difficult to understand why some of these doctors would say, well, I'm going to give it to my kids first. And those are the children that came down with hot polio and became crippled.
This was in Oakland, this was near Oakland?
No, it's a small town near Oakland, and that's the name of the company.
Like Benicia or something like that?
No, it's south of Oakland.
I think it's Pleasanton that's south, no?
That's west.
It's west, hold on. Emeryville is north.
Correct.
Emeryville.
Emeryville.
Yeah, it's
Emeryville.
Mm-hmm.
That is where this company was located.
Okay.
There's two words, and the last word is affair.
The Emeryville Fair, is that what you're saying?
No, I was wrong about that. It's in Emeryville, which is a tiny enclave.
Right. Just south of Berkeley.
Just south of Berkeley, correct?
Mm-hmm. But your point in all this is that polio and polio vaccines have been around for many years, decades, really. And polio has pretty much been eradicated, right? Pretty much.
Yes, there are outbreaks in those countries that do not vaccinate against polio, despite strong efforts by the WHO to vaccinate those people. And they're usually found in the country next to India,
Mm-hmm.
Pakistan.
Pakistan, yeah.
They're usually found in Pakistan, maybe in rural parts of India, where those countries have a very difficult time getting the vaccines to all of the population.
Right.
It was thought for several years that it had been eradicated, and then it sprung up again in those countries in Asia. It only happens in this country when somebody from the African countries arrive here and carry it here, but it's squashed quickly.
I mean, it's amazing to me, like how quickly you can find on the internet relevant timelines. Like I just pulled up the polio timeline, and it looks like when you look at this timeline, it looks like it's telling a story that says the earliest cases of polio, date back to the 1800s, right? Maybe,
That's right.
Maybe even before that. It begins with an outbreak by a British physician, identified it, Michael Underwood, in 1789.
Go down to where it says Kaprowski. He was my boss, and he used my cells to make the polio vaccine. It was successful only because, that's a test.
Kaprowski polio vaccine test, 1948 to 1950.
Well, there's a terrible error. It's Letterly Laboratories in New York State, not Philadelphia. The test on himself and his assistant, well, they didn't drink the vaccine. You cannot get polio from an attenuated vaccine that's drunk.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much wrong in this area.
But you work with Kaprowski, it sounds like.
Oh, yes. I produced the first polio vaccine using Kaprowski strains of that virus when I was at Wistar, and he was the director of the institute. This was in
Philadelphia.
58. This is in Philadelphia in 1958. He came to Philadelphia from Letterly Labs in New York State.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now it says, yes, in the Congo. That's where he did the testing, in the Congo.
Mm-hmm.
And I made the first vaccine, and I can send you the reference to it,
Mm-hmm.
with the Kaprowski strains. And I produced vaccine for several years at the Wistar Institute. I fed it to my own children. It was produced in one of my human diploid cell strains, which gave to the virus the qualities that made it successful worldwide. My cells that I gifted to Kaprowski allowed the hot virus to become attenuated. Most importantly, it also made the vaccine clean of unwanted other viruses that existed in monkey kidney cells that were used prior to my discovery of normal human diploid cells. And then he went ahead and patented it without naming me.
Ouch.
I asked you about that several years ago. I asked,
That patent has since expired, right?
yes, but the Wistar Institute still gets from the rubella vaccine, which has the same result. And I gifted my cells to a person at the Wistar Institute who developed the rubella vaccine that gave the rubella vaccine all of the terrific good features that it has. They patented that in secret without telling me. I asked you and your boss, what was his name?
Bill Fenwick?
And Bill Fenwick, because I learned that they were receiving $30 million a year in fees.
Wow.
From several pharmaceutical companies. To this day, and they purposely left me off of the patent applications, despite the fact that in the first paragraph in the applications, they say the vaccine that they're patenting was produced on normal human diploid cells, which enabled the vaccine. The vaccines, plural, rubella, rabies, polio, and I got not a nickel from that. And those guys who were involved in making the vaccine got an amount of money that I've never been able to discern the amount. But I do know that the Institute gets 30 million a year. I told Bill Fenwick, he said it was out of date because I didn't learn about it until it was out of date. I didn't know it while it was happening. It was a secret.
Right.
The reason I resigned from the Wistar Institute is that a colleague came to me one day showing me a letter signed by Kaprowski offering to Burroughs Wellcome in England, major pharmaceutical company and vaccine producer,
right,
offering to the company WI-38 and the technology that I discovered,
right,
to make vaccines, signed by the director.
Wow.
He had an obligation when he arrived from Letterly to raise funds in support of the people who he brought with him from Letterly. He never reached that goal. He intended to use that letter that I described to raise money to support the full members of the Wistar Institute who he brought with him from Letterly. I was only an associate member, so I did not qualify for the money that would have been raised from the cells that I invented.
Right. Yep. There's so many examples of that in life where you say the real inventor doesn't get the kind of respect or royalties. I mean, this whole computer industry, the computer graphical user interface, the computer mouse, so many aspects of what is modern computing that Apple and Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak and others have taken advantage of. The actual inventor didn't get any recognition. I mean, he's getting some recognition now, but fundamentally, he didn't get any of the royalties. He didn't get any of the real recognition. And he was the real instigator of the entire industry. And
yes, I know some of those stories.
I mean, there's a lot of that in Silicon Valley. There's a lot of that nationally. There's a lot of that globally. You know, the reality.
Well, I know several of those stories in biology. One of which involves the birth control, the early birth control pills.
Right. I mean, we're talking about Doug Engelbart, because people are probably wondering what the hell are we talking about. Doug Engelbart was a famous inventor, only famous in his later years, because people wanted to understand, how did he come up with this idea for a pointing device? Here's a picture of it, made it out of wood.
Yes, I remember
wheels on it. And, you know, he never really got the financial compensation. And he had a big vision of how the user interface of computers would be connected to humans, because his whole pitch is, it's not about artificial intelligence, it's about augmenting human intelligence. And the computer is just an amplifier. The computer is not going to replace the human brain. The computer is just going to amplify the human brain. And you could argue this invention and the graphical user interface that went with it really changed modern computing for both Apple, as well as Microsoft, as well as Intel, as well as all the personal computer manufacturers, IBM, a host of others that are in the business now, Hewlett Packard. And, you know, he's the guy who did it, never really got the recognition. And, you know, now people realized some number of years after his death, he died in 2013, that he really should have been more recognized than he was.
Yeah, there are plenty of stories like that in biology. I won't go into the details, just briefly say that the discovery of the first birth control pills, which made the company that ended up producing it, they're still in existence today, although they have been bought up, I believe, by somebody. But that discovery was made because it was known that a certain chemical compound was the heart of the hormone that prevented pregnancies. And that heart of the chemical was a cluster of hexagons. It was found, I don't know this part of the story, it was found to exist in what's called the Mexican yam, which is a huge yam, like it grows like a potato underground. And it was carried, one yam would be carried on the shoulder of a native who took it out of the jungle and brought it to the laboratory, I believe in Texas, where this fellow isolated the heart of the hormone which existed in this yam. This heart exists in many plants. It was ultimately found, but it was found first in this yam. And he and the companies that were exploring birth control pills discovered that he had found this major part of the hormone, and they hired him. In fact, the company existed for a long time in the Stanford Industrial Park. And they hired him, used his discovery, and then fired him, and continued to make billions of dollars on the birth control pill built around the heart of the chemical that he found in Mexican yams.
Yeah, it's sort of in the nature of humans to have greed trump integrity, I guess would be the right way to put it, right? I mean, you could argue that's kind of the human condition. Greed just takes its role or plays its role out over time, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
That's
that's just the way it goes. It's like greed persists.
I know I know as many of those stories in biology as you know in electronics.
Right. So, Len, what do you think is going to play out here between COVID, Omicron, monkeypox, polio? We've covered a lot of subjects this afternoon. Do you think we're going to get to some level of normalcy that, at least for 100 years after 1920, let's say, once the virus seemed to dissipate, I guess would be the right way to put it, it seemed as though we had 100 years or so of normalcy, let's call it, 1920 to 2020. Do you think we're ever going to get back to that 100-year cycle, or are we just too overloaded to see that play out?
No, I think this kind of virus epidemiology and causation that we're experiencing today has always existed. It is only because of the media, the existence of the smartphones, the immediacy of communications, the hype for reasons only known to the media. I don't believe there's very much difference at all.
Oh, so you're saying it's really just
a matter of popularity being produced by media.
Yeah, you're saying that this is really modern worldwide communications.
Yes.
Changing the game.
Yes, nature didn't come up with anything different in respect to the spectrum of viruses that are made and that occur frequently through mutations, and also by the idiots who eat jungle meat. Who ever heard of that? It probably has been going on for a long time, but we certainly didn't know about it until recent years. Who knew that people were going into the jungle and killing whatever had 4 legs and ate it? They're still doing it in China. So I don't believe that this is new in any way other than the species of viruses that are here today that may not have been as popular or have circulated because of the events that I described in past years. So what we're experiencing today will continue forever if the speed of communication remains as it is.
Well, it's going to get even more amplified because people are able to cut and paste video rapidly, as we've seen, and TikTok and Facebook and other free services allow those videos to proliferate rapidly, videos, audios, everything, PowerPoint presentation. So the speed of delivery has accelerated and will continue to accelerate because the tools for cutting and pasting that information continue to get more and more distributed and more easily used by every citizen that wants to be a reporter, whether it's analyzed or not analyzed, right?
Yes, yeah, I'm sure you're correct.
The speed of information, it's just amazing. Like if you looked at that January 6th series of events that occurred in real time, the speed of delivery of that information, of course, it's taken us 18 months to analyze it. That's got to shorten at some level. I mean, this analysis that's being done 18 months later could and should probably have been done within days later. And, fundamentally, it might have changed some things about where we are today. but 18 months is a long time. I imagine it'll keep shrinking. 12 months, 6 months, it'll almost become like instant replay where people can fundamentally see everything.
Much of the media today is sent by the speed of light, which is, for all practical purposes, instantaneous. So, I mean, there was a time, as one example, Biden's coming down with COVID was known within fractions of a second after it was revealed to the public.
Right.
Worldwide, when you and I were kids, that was impossible to believe would happen.
Right. It's very, very immediate. And I think it will continue apace so that people can essentially analyze data and facts pretty rapidly. And you might say, maybe this is an example. The monkeypox thing is sort of being over amplified, right?
Yes, I'm sure you're correct.
But your point is, it's not like we had 100 years of peace. We had 100 years of non-amplification of a lot of stuff that's out there, right?
Exactly.
So we'll probably continue to see what might be called the over-amplification of risk or the over-amplification of issues, or what might be called issues.
We have over-amplification of advertising today.
Mm-hmm.
And over-amplification of the January 6th events. You find it on all of the media, and it's going to stay in all of the media for a long time.
It'll probably continue in many ways, right?
Yeah. In medieval times, you had the town crier. As recently as your and my adulthood, we had something called a newspaper.
Right. Physical newspapers seem so out of date. I still get the physical New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times. And the reality is, when you get that physical paper, it's pretty out of date. It's reporting on stuff that you read on the internet or through a newsreader, sometimes 36 hours or more earlier. I mean, literally, it's old. It's old information.
That's right.
And, you got to imagine the newspaper businesses are really much more website businesses are now, even though some people still like a physical paper. I still like it because I'm old school and old fashioned, because you get to see the whole range of topics across the physical newspaper that you really can't do with a screen. But, a lot of people don't like handling the recycling of the newsprint. They don't like the expense of it either, because it's more expensive to get a physical paper delivered.
You're right.
Yeah, so thank you for coming on this afternoon, and I appreciate the discussion.
I do too.
You look great, Len. So whatever you're doing to stay fit and healthy, you're mobile, you're taking care of yourself, you live alone at the age of 93? Do I have that right? 94. Was your birthday just recently?
In May.
In May. So you're probably following the path of your mom, who lived to 106 or more, right?
Well, I hope so, although I'm beginning to experience some loss of balance when I'm walking, although I don't need a cane, but I'm noticing some deterioration in that. And in memory, as you have observed, short-term memory, they're not pathologies, they're not illnesses, they are characteristic of becoming old.
I think you're still pretty sharp. I have to say, I think you're still very sharp. So.
I don't think so. I can't remember these important things.
Well, the fact that you can identify it and say,
I can see the events and the people, but I fail to be able to name them.
Right.
And that's very, very usual as you grow old, and I suspect you're experiencing a bit of that yourself.
Well, clearly, there's moments when I say, God, I remember that guy's name just last week, and why can't I remember it today?
Mm.
And it's a crowded life. There's so many facts, so many figures, so much information being thrown at you daily. And I'm not a big TV watcher. I don't know where people find time to watch TV, but I agree with you that over time, you kind of wish you could instantly recall everything that you thought of that you could and should have recalled.
I just recalled the name of a company in Emeryville.
Okay, great.
What I described is called the Cutter incident.
Oh, okay.
Cutter.
Right. That's a famous company. They're still
Look it up.
Yeah, I think they're still in business, Len.
Well, I thought they were bought by somebody.
Cutter? I think there was a Cutter Institute as well, wasn't there?
Perhaps, but the company that I know, I'm almost certain has been bought several times over.
Right.
Anyhow, look up the Cutter incident and you'll get some more information about what I described.
Okay, well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Give my regards to Lee.
Of course. Absolutely.
And my condolences to her.
Yeah. She was sad.
And
Liz. Yeah. Quite. Transitions are painful. There's no question about it. Yeah.
And the next time you come to California, let me know.
Yeah, we'll get together. In fact, I was just associating that you buried your wife under that, in your backyard under that tree. And
It wasn't my backyard. It was the forest, which is about 5 city blocks east of where my house is.
Dr. Walter Bortz, Wally Bortz, had the ashes of his wife, also Ruth Ann, spread on Windy Hill. We did a ceremony for her on Windy Hill because she really liked climbing Windy Hill. And of course, when you have a parent that dies, it makes you as a child of that parent think about, well, how do you want your funeral to go? And Lee said she wanted her ashes, not this expensive burial stuff, spread on Windy Hill in California.
She wants to be cremated.
Wants to be cremated. And I said the same thing, which is this expensive stuff, I'd rather give the money to charity. And this expensive stuff just seems crazy. And ashes are fine, and spraying them on Windy Hill or the Pacific Ocean or anywhere else is
You remind me that me and my children and their families, we established a scholarship at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, where Ruth trained as an artist.
right. So
It's a yearly scholarship in her name. So, so something useful has been done.
I think that's exactly the right thing. That's exactly the right approach. So congratulations.
By the way, it reminds me that your boss's name that always escapes me.
Bill Fenwick.
That there was supposed to have been some kind of celebration of Fenwick's life.
Yeah, there was. There were actually 2 of them.
Because I thought, since I was contacted when they were being discussed, I thought I would be invited, but obviously not.
It was a relatively small group. The one that I went to one of the 2. I didn't go to the second one, but it was a relatively small group. And then that was done by kind of a group of friends. And then the law firm, Fenwick and West, did a separate celebration with people.
Okay, well, I'm happy to know there were those celebrations.
Yeah, there's a good memory. There's a good memory of him. And a lot of people left videos and the like. So there's good there's kind of a good history there.
Okay, Jack, good to speak to you. Regards to Lee, and hope to see you soon again.
Yeah, take care, Len. You look great. I'm glad we connected.
You look well also.
Yeah, I'm losing weight. I'm trying to get down to my high school weight. I keep working on it. Take care, Len. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.